Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining us today with our Value Partners Suite. We are here today with Aviv, Head of Partnerships with Sweep, Mallory, Vice President of Nihilus, and last and certainly not least, Max, CEO of Found HQ. We're here today to go over how and when to start your Salesforce management. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Over to you, Aviv.
Hi, Gina, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we can use the first couple minutes of this discussion with a quick round of introductions. So Mallory, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Mallory. I've been at Nihilus for about a year now. I lead revenue operations and business operations. Being at Nihilus is the first time that I am not at a MarTech company. So I've been in B2B SaaS for my entire career and more specifically marketing technology up until now. But love revenue operations and love the way that it unifies people around a common set of goals and objectives.
And we're going to talk a lot about this today. But thank you for joining us, Mallory. Max, you're next.
Thank you, Aviv. My name is Max. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Found HQ. So I've been in the Salesforce and RevOps world for the last decade and been building Found HQ for the last 4 years. We're essentially part freelancers marketplace. So we help match companies to our network of about 6,000 Salesforce freelancers globally. And then we're part sort of advisory firm. So helping companies of all sizes structure their teams, understand what to hire and when across ops and systems. So I think certainly this is a relevant conversation, something that we have our hands in quite a bit.
Absolutely. So thank you, Max, for joining us. And I would say before I'll introduce myself as the one that will host this event, that if anyone has questions during the webinar, just feel free to drop it in the chat. We will try to get to this at the end. And of course, if there are specific questions in the middle, we'll try to stop and answer those. But again, thank you, RevGenius, for hosting this event. Thank you, Max and Mallory, for joining us. My name is Aviv. I'm from Sweep. A word about myself. I'm in RevOps probably in the last 10 years, more or less, probably even before it was named as RevOps. And I'm happy to say that I'm with Sweep today, and Sweep is probably my dream product as RevOps. And we're going to talk a bit about this today as well. Sweep is a visual workspace for Salesforce, which actually makes Salesforce as simple as it sounds, visual, that people can actually collaborate together, build processes together, and deploy changes and new funnels and new processes to Salesforce in a native way. And again, we're going to talk a lot about this topic today. And before starting, I want to kick off with a story that I think will be relevant for this discussion. I don't know where the guests are in their Salesforce journey. Did they buy Salesforce already? Are they thinking? And this is not the discussion of whether you should or shouldn't buy Salesforce, but more around the timing for startup, because we know it's a pressing question. So a couple of years ago, I was hired as RevOps for a company. And I remember that in the hiring process, the CEO asked me, do you have any experience with Salesforce? And I said, yes, I worked with Salesforce as RevOps, so obviously yes. And he said, great, because this is going to be the first project. Once you're going to join, we need you to get us on Salesforce. I said, okay, that's an easy task. Obviously, buying Salesforce licenses is the easy part in this journey. And I remember joining the company, obviously looking for my big first win, talking with Salesforce AE, buying a few Salesforce licenses. And then I remember coming back to the CEO and I was starting to talk about the partner that we need to hire because obviously we cannot implement it ourselves. And I remember the look on his face when he said, why do we need to pay someone if we have you doing this thing? And obviously I had to explain a lot of things, which we're going to cover today. But also I remember the interesting thing was that he told me, okay, I understood what you just said, but how long is this going to take? Like when we will have Salesforce up and running? And to be honest, we didn't have anything at this point, not a process. I can't even say we had like understanding of our product and our pricing. So I said 6 months. It, by the way, took longer than this. But remember this story, especially when we're gonna run over a few of the topics of today. And I will hand this to Max. Max, I guess there isn't one answer to the question when companies should go on Salesforce, but please share with us, when do you see companies joining this journey?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it varies tremendously throughout the ecosystem. I think there's a lot of considerations about when it makes sense to adopt Salesforce. I think certainly based on needs, sophistication, maturity of the business, but I think it's crucial to also understand before adopting Salesforce whether or not you are prepared to adopt Salesforce. And that to me sort of comes down to, two primary factors. One, which I think you touched on, is around the process piece, right? I think you hear in RevOps and BizOps in general, the sort of people, process, technology trio. And you really need to have things occur in that order. You need the right people to design, structure, streamline the right processes, and only then do you have the ability to adopt the right technology and wrap it around the processes you have in place. And so you certainly can get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you really don't have processes, whether it's a lack of sales process, whether it's a lack of quoting and pricing processes that you're trying to roll CPQ on top of. So I think it depends. There's no stage of growth where you can easily say, yeah, now is the time when you need to adopt Salesforce. It really depends on the maturity of the processes that you have in place. So I think that's the first piece of it. I think the second piece of it is really making sure that you don't adopt Salesforce before you're then willing and able to invest in it the way that you need to. I think when it comes to Salesforce, like, perception is reality. If you view it as just another CRM, not really looking to do much more than that, you'll see minimal investment go into the platform, and then little more than baseline functionality come out of it. And it's a lost opportunity. It leads to lower adoption because it's not adding enough value to the reps or the end users, so they don't want to use it, which in turn leads to decreased visibility and insights that RevOps teams can get. And the overall ROI is then just kind of modest. I think companies that view it as the foundation of their go-to-market infrastructure and how everything will scale on top of it, it really then becomes sort of the path to true 360-degree visibility into your customer lifecycle. And those are the companies that then invest as such and see sort of outsized returns on that investment. So I think there has to be a willingness to invest and actually put horsepower behind Salesforce before you go ahead and implement it. It is not something where you go out and get a consultant or get a consulting firm, they implement it, and then you're done. It needs to be an iterative, incremental process, and you have to be prepared as an organization to put the money and resources behind it. So I think that can't be overstated. Like, that needs to be as much of the decision as the features, functionality, and actual day-to-day, week-to-week value that you want to be extracting from the tool. And so thinking about how that will look from the start, which I'm sure we'll touch more on, is critical.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I want to go back to the beginning of your answer when you said people, process, and then technology. So let's actually start with the people. And I think it's a pressing issue, Mallory. I see Mallory already smiling about this because Mallory is RevOps, and obviously this community is all around RevOps. Let's answer this, or let's figure out this debate. Mallory, RevOps. Where does Salesforce fit into the RevOps role? How many times did you face the question of, are you RevOps? You should know Salesforce. You should own Salesforce. So what do you say? Does RevOps is a Salesforce?
It's a good debate. I've done it a variety of ways. I've seen it handled a variety of ways. I'm going to start at the end and then kind of work backwards. So at Nihilus, we have two guys who help keep track of our Salesforce and all of the connected tools, and they are on the RevOps team. So first of all, I feel very lucky that we have two. One of them is a developer and he's really skilled. Second, I feel really lucky that they're on my team, and I think that's the best way to do it. But of course, a lot of companies cannot start out that way. So if I think back to startups that I've been a part of, you normally have a very ambitious sales leader who says, I can figure this out. And they are the one running Salesforce in the very, very beginning. The extent to which they customize it is kind of up in the air, but almost everyone starts out this way. And it's because realistically, you don't have the budget for even RevOps yet, let alone a Salesforce admin. So oftentimes people have been kind of dying for both. They're like, we need RevOps. We need someone to fix our Salesforce. We have so many needs when we're a startup. And so a lot of times people are looking for that, unicorn person who can be the RevOps leader at a very early stage and still be tactical enough to be the Salesforce admin. I've been in that role before, and it's doable, but it's hard. And I think it really starts to come down to the priorities that you want your RevOps leader to be able to tackle. So if there are enough important priorities, such as planning and process and getting everything lined up for the business itself, your RevOps person probably will not have time to manage Salesforce. And if you see that priority still needs to get covered, a lot of people will bring in outside help at that point. So that could be a freelancer or a firm. And then I think it's probably around like Series B, where I see people hire dedicated Salesforce admins. And I'm just being very transparent about what I've seen in my past businesses, because it would be great to hire from day one, but unfortunately, we just don't have those resources that early on.
And I agree with you. I think that this is something that we see with Sweep quite a lot, that even if a RevOps is managing Salesforce and they're dangerous enough to know Salesforce and to work with Salesforce, the question is what goes instead, right? Like, what are the priorities that you're neglecting that if you would have this resource, you would be able to invest in? And I guess this is related to the understanding of what RevOps is. And you mentioned strategy and tactics. So we all know that, but Salesforce daily work is very much tactical. It comes into problem solving and helping and guiding the sales team. So there's actually a lot of work in the Salesforce administrator role. And I do agree with you that if you have RevOps and you invested in your mature enough organization to bring RevOps early on, you should definitely clear their plate and let them focus on other things. But you mentioned a couple, just for the audience that maybe doesn't know, what are the options out there in the market? Max, what option does a company have when they are looking for a Salesforce resource?
Yeah, I think there's three main sort of resourcing models around Salesforce in terms of, where and how you get those resources and acquire that knowledge for your organization. And again, it's very dependent on your stage of growth. The big three are obviously hiring full-time dedicated resources. The second is, going to Salesforce consulting firms, like a professional services organization. And then the third is engaging independent contractors or freelancers directly. So I think taking that back to the top, I think the ultimate goal is certainly building out a full-time internal Salesforce team, whether that's one admin or for larger companies, they have 40, 50 person teams of admins, developers, architects, product managers, etc. So that's very dependent on your needs. But that is and should be the goal. You really need to sort of know the consistency of your workload in order to make that investment. You don't want to hire an admin and then have them, occupied only 15% of the time. But it is by far the most cost-effective way to not only get Salesforce work done, but also build that sort of soft IP, that internal knowledge and competency around Salesforce so that you can structure and scale a long-term product roadmap. Consulting firms, I think, great option, typically better for like larger end-to-end projects where you need an entire team to show up on your doorstep and deliver a set scope of work end to end, managed under one roof. So that's going to be most common when you're implementing Salesforce for the first time, or you're on Sales Cloud and you're deploying CPQ. You're typically going to go to a consulting firm so that they can assemble their own project team, and they have a delivery methodology that they can manage by. That is also the most expensive option by far, just consulting firms being what they are. And then the third is independent contractors or freelancers. And that's the space that we deal in, and I think they're really good for sort of everything in between. So there's endless use cases where you can use contractors. They're good for boosting capacity for short-term initiatives, or backfilling an important FTE that did depart unexpectedly. They can cross into strategic projects like a consulting firm, but operate a little bit more as an embedded member of the company's team. And there's also cases where you've got very specialized projects or tasks that need to be done, where even if you have an internal team, maybe they're not capable of managing phase 2 for your CPQ roadmap and architecture planning. So you can bring in a consultant for 6 weeks, 8 weeks to help kind of lay the groundwork for what needs to be done, and then the internal team can pick up where they left off and actually handle the execution and the build. So those are the three big ones. I think to Mallory's point, and I was actually doing a little bit of research for some content that we're putting together of when companies are typically hiring their first full-time admin, and we sort of narrowed the field to just looking at some of the big sales automation platforms. So when did they hire their first FTE for Salesforce? And it Mallory said Series B, and the data is very consistent with that. So Gong, HighSpot, Outreach, PandaDoc, all of them hired their first Salesforce hire right around Series B. It was an admin, but you can go later. Clary didn't hire their first until later. SalesLoft didn't hire till Series C. Seismic even later than that. So it varies, and there's some sort of nuance to the decision. But yeah, I think generally Series B is around the stage where you've reached the velocity of growth, both within the sales org and otherwise, that you need to, start getting a little more serious and dedicated help around the platform.
And it is important to emphasize, especially for the folks here that are, again, considering transitioning to Salesforce, only at Series B you need to bring your first admin, right? There are a bunch of solutions that Mac just covered. Sweep is one of them as well, offering it like on a platform that are suitable for smaller teams that just want to get themselves up and running in Salesforce. It shouldn't be as scary as it sounds, but it definitely sounds scary when you're mentioning like a 40, 50 people team just on the Salesforce side. So I think we should talk about one of the most, I would say one of the issues that I'm not sure people are aware of, especially not in the beginning of the way of their Salesforce journey. And this is, and you mentioned it a couple of times, expensive. And I would actually, I want to point a question here to the audience. Let's see if people are aware, but there is actually a point of data that we really love, that is how much companies are spending on Salesforce services and ecosystem, comparing to obviously how much they're paying for the licenses. So try and complete my sentence. On every dollar that you're spending on Salesforce license, how much a company is spending on services? Max and Mallory, you're not playing in this game. Also, people from Sweep that are in this call, you're not playing this game. But let's see if people have any guesstimation on how much companies are spending. Let's see if we're getting some answers. Okay, I see one answer coming in.
Ooh, that's high.
That's high. Mallory says it's high. We have only one guess, so I guess next time I should offer prizes for this, right? For the best answer. But actually, the answer that we just got in is not as far. Okay. We have Seth also. 40 cents on the dollar. Okay, Seth. I hope you're sitting. But yes, it's more than $6 on every dollar companies are spending on Salesforce. And this is crazy. And again, companies in the beginning of the journey, don't know that. So Max, let's talk a little bit about the cost. Why it's so expensive?
Yeah, I think the Salesforce presents the opportunity to invest in the platform because the ceiling of what you can do with it, how customizable it is, how much you can integrate it to really be the infrastructure of your business is unlimited. I think the data that you see around like total cost of ownership, right? So for every dollar we spend on a Salesforce license, how many dollars are we spending on headcount or professional services to actually make the tool do what we need it to do? I think you do see a slightly skewed statistic in that, because the reality is that the less you invest in Salesforce at the start, the more you're going to be forced to invest in it in the long run. If you set it up poorly, you design it poorly, you build, a whole ton of custom code or flows or integrations that are going to either be built improperly and therefore need to be, deprecated or fixed constantly, or you just kind of outgrow what's being built because it didn't have a long-term view in mind. You end up sort of creating the headache for you that then can increase the total cost of ownership in Salesforce. But it doesn't need to be particularly high. And when I mention a 40 to 50 person team, like that's, those are multinational corporations that have enormous, not just go-to-market orgs, but enormous scale and are leveraging, 6 or 7 different products, not, just a Sales Cloud, Service Cloud customer that is a startup. So I think, yeah, it really, we're talking about sort of setting up the foundation of it, whether you're doing that with a consulting firm or FTEs, or you do go out and get the right tools that can enable you to build the right functionality and do it in the right way. I think when the foundation that you're building on is strong, the total cost of actually managing and supporting Salesforce shouldn't look anything like what I think the averages in the market do look like. They look like that because the reality is a lot of companies, it is an afterthought. The ongoing investment and ongoing just iteration of Salesforce is an afterthought, and that's how you can get dug into some bad habits from a systems perspective that are expensive to sort of dig your way out of.
Yeah, and I love your analogy for Salesforce as an investment. So I want to ask something, Mallory, because I know in the last few years, there was kind of a revolution in the sales tech stack. And we see a lot of tools out there using this framework of use us, do this, and this will be your ROI, right? Like using ROI calculators. This is how you're going to present it to your CFO to get the buying approval. How do you measure the return on investment on a platform like Salesforce, Mallory?
Well, I think the first step is to try to measure against that total cost of ownership like we're talking about. So it's not just the invoice that you get from salesforce.com. It is all of the investment behind it. Trying to make sure that you're covered there. It is going to be a bigger number. I would love to think that Nihilus is not at the $6 for every dollar. I can't imagine. That blew me away. But, I actually don't put that much time into trying to calculate the ROI of a specific software. A lot of softwares work together. A lot of processes encompass more than one piece of technology. If you don't have a strategy and a process, then the technology is pointless. So we were joking the other day, it's kind of like buying a vacuum cleaner and putting it in your entryway. And then a couple of days go by and you're thinking, well, why isn't my house clean? What's happening here? And if you don't use the vacuum, if you don't have a plan to clean your house, it's not going to get done. So you really do have to have a strategy for how you want this software to get used. And if I try to connect the dots to like the different, admin options here, there are a couple of reasons that I think this matters, because people tend to choose Salesforce when they want to really grow and scale and when they need a lot of customization, because it is potentially the most customizable platform on the planet, right? You can do anything with it. I remember I was in restoration hardware making a return one day, and they pulled me up in Salesforce, and I was like, whoa, restoration hardware is, looking at me in Salesforce. It was just this very surreal moment. But it's that customizable. And the tendency, or like the temptation when you very first get in there, is to say, well, we have this very special case. We want to customize it to be just like this. And we have a lot of customization to do. So then you get a freelancer or a firm or someone to come in and build this extremely custom solution for you. And then a few years later, your business changes and you've backed yourself into a corner with this functionality that maybe is very rigid and hard to go back and change. So if you look at your strategy and you find that it is so customized that none of the best practices tools out there, like a Gong or your standard CPQs or your sales loft, if they can't support the strategy you want to do, then I would ask myself if I'm making it too complicated right up front, because there are infinite number of ways to do something, but a lot of the best practices are covered out there with the vendors that integrate with Salesforce. And so you have to resist that temptation to like overcomplicate and overbuild just to fit a very specific use case that could change.
And I think it's super interesting because one of the things, it's one of the older discussions that I was part of, is when you're bringing a new technology to the organization, especially when you already have Salesforce. And then there's always this question of buy versus build, right? And we all know this question. We have Salesforce already. Can't we do it on Salesforce? So Mallory, what will be your tip for companies that are considering Techstack if they already have Salesforce?
Yeah, I think that Salesforce has grown a lot over the years by acquiring companies that used to have, an add-on technology. They've acquired the company, they bring it in-house, they make it part of the product suite. First of all, you still pay more for that. So you're going to have an extra license for that tool on top of your Sales Cloud probably. In the case that you don't, and you have a chance to kind of build it yourself, lead scoring is a great example of this. I've met a lot of people who have this really intense and custom lead scoring that is a homegrown build inside of Sales Cloud. Is that free? Kind of. You have to invest the time for someone to build it, right? You may or may not have to pay an architect to build it, but it's not an annual software license. And so some people think of that as being free. And when the time comes to progress or grow or change, if you encounter all of this technical debt because you are stuck in a 5 years ago lead scoring model, think of that cost. Like that is where my mind goes in terms of not being able to adapt and be agile and change with your business priorities. So I think there's different costs all around, and the right answer is usually somewhere in the middle. Like my advice is to keep it as simple as possible. And if you think that you need to do lead scoring based on someone's like hair color and there's nobody in the market who offers that, chances are you might be overthinking it. So, think about what's out there already.
Or you might be acquired by Salesforce one day. You don't know that.
Exactly.
But actually, it's actually something that we see quite a lot at Sweep. And again, we love it because we see how companies can utilize the Salesforce native capabilities, but not overthinking on the build side. How you can actually build things, and we are making it super easy to do things like lead routing or integration with Slack, things that you used to buy off-the-shelf products for, but we are actually doing it over Salesforce in a native way, which is obviously something that we're very proud of and we see our customers enjoying. So the question of buy versus build, there is a middle ground. This is the important part of it.
And I'm sure you've seen a lot of people who came in with something really complicated and you helped them go back to something that was a little simpler.
Yep. And it's always, I think when we're talking about processes in general, we all had this experience, and I guess we have Salesforce consultants in the crowd. We always like to go back to, the whiteboard. Can we design it? And one of the barriers that we see is I want to say the language, but it's more of like the technical language and the understanding of what is the process. Because writing something on the wall on like a whiteboard with the names of the stages is one thing. Translating it into a technical scope is a whole different thing. And this is something that we see quite a lot with this barrier between the technical people and the business people that are not talking the same language. Max, do you have anything else to add on this? You probably see quite a lot of those.
Just in general, in terms of buy versus build.
And buy versus build, or the infinite discussion between how a process should look from the technical side or for the commercial side. How I would say, if I would ask something more specific from you, is how frequently are you brought in order to bridge this gap between business people that are saying, this is what I want, or the technical people that are saying, this is going to be a long project?
Yeah. I mean, I think the dynamic between, business people, whether it's the RevOps team or, the ultimate stakeholders in sales or support, and the technical teams, there can be a little bit of friction there, because, it's a question of not just prioritization of urgency, right? Is this something that we do need today? But also prioritization of the actual tactical team focused on executing that project. And so if we do need it today, this is how long it's going to take to actually do it right. I think that, that friction exists in pretty much every company and at any scale. And I think successfully bridging that gap means having a resource model and really a team structure that has individuals who are systems focused and can think in technical terms. How would I build this? How long is it going to take to build? What are the technical dependencies? What's the potential for the processes to mature beyond what we're building, and changes need to happen? But they're embedded within the business to the extent that they do intimately understand what the process needs and operational needs of that team are. And they sort of act as a conduit between a VP of sales saying, I need XYZ. They've got enough context within the business to help prioritize whether that is, in fact, a need that should be prioritized on the roadmap, but they also have the technical acumen to scope that project and collaborate internally on how it then needs to be kind of prioritized within the systems team. So it's difficult because both sides are going to have their priority. The systems team is going to have their roadmap, their backlog, their tickets that are dictating their day-to-day, week-to-week as is. The stakeholders are, don't have much visibility into that and everything that's being done within the systems team. They just know their pain today and their needs today. And so figuring out how you can effectively bridge those two without creating more friction, I think the solution really is figuring out how to embed that systems knowledge within specific work streams or, business teams, which a lot of companies do very effectively. But if the right hand isn't talking to the left, then, you end up with the systems team just saying, no, we don't have time for it, which angers everyone. Or you end up with the stakeholders saying, this is now your top priority and it needs to get done because that's what we need. And, building in that sort of reactive manner is also a way that can sort of get you in trouble. So I think building that kind of harmony comes down to team structure and how you're setting up that, that sort of autonomy.
And it's important to say that in those cases that, again, we see quite a lot, this turns to be the most expensive solution, right? Not thinking completely on the project and then eventually changing vendors or changing team. And then you have inherited Salesforce environment that you don't know who built and you don't know why things were built. So eventually those things will be the most expensive. But I definitely agree with you, Max. Thank you. We're a little bit over the half an hour. So before we're going to wrap up, I do see that we have a few questions from the audience. So I see Adria is asking, and I will ask Mallory to answer this because you probably have the experience with both of the systems, because it is important. We're not trying to scare anyone from Salesforce, exactly the opposite. Adrian is asking, why Salesforce and not HubSpot or any other? What is the particular advantage for Salesforce? So Mallory, from your experience, you probably worked with both.
Yeah, I have worked with both. I think that HubSpot has come very far in the last few years. The most common situation where I see someone want to use HubSpot is when they're looking to have, the landing pages, the forms, the marketing automation, and the CRM kind of all in one bundle for simplicity. And so I would say that the reputation in the past of HubSpot was that it was much more simple and easy to use. I think they have grown into a place where they can support more than what they used to. But I still typically think of Salesforce as much more customizable and a little bit easier to scale to a multinational situation. So that's what I've personally seen. I'm sure I could be proven wrong by somebody out there that is using HubSpot in a really big business. For example, I know that HubSpot is using their own CRM for that. So there are a lot of options, but I think it comes down to what your team is comfortable with, what you have experience with, and what your needs are.
I really agree with you also about the experience of the sales team. This is something that in many cases not taking into consideration. And you should ask yourself, you should ask your team, what system are they used to? Because we all know that trying to enforce a new system is always a challenge. It's not impossible, it's a challenge. And if you have a team that is very familiar with Salesforce and trying to show them HubSpot, it might be easier in some points, but it won't be the best solution for them to adopt. And we all know that CRM adoption eventually means better data, and better data means better decision making. So it's something that we see all the time. And I would say, I think, if I would add my 2 cents to this question, is bringing Salesforce is in some point of the business, at least, if we're looking at the past 10 years, you will need to shift into to Salesforce. And this will probably going to be one of the most stressing, challenging projects that your go-to-market team will face. So as soon as possible, I think would be ideal, because eventually you will need to do it. Let's see, we have another question coming in. I think we touched upon it a little bit, but Max, you probably see it from the scoping level. How can we prevent over-engineering in Salesforce, from Gabriella? Or what are the questions you ask yourself?
So I think where you most often see Salesforce get over-engineered is either something Mallory mentioned earlier, which is you try and do too much on day one. You try and out of the gate get all of the features, functionality, workflow automations that you can imagine into Salesforce on day one. I think that can very easily just lead to, over customization of things that you're going to outgrow, whether it's systems you'll outgrow and migrate off of, or various processes that you've sort of enabled that are bound to change. I think the second one, and the more common one, is that over-engineering Salesforce is really a symptom of just reactively building as you go. So companies who, either the RevOps team or, stakeholders have a need, it finds its way, into the backlog and pretty much just gets built and pushed into production because it's addressing a need that is here and now. Those things start to compound on each other, and you end up with an over-engineered instance. Whereas the way most companies, I think, should be operating is you really want to look at Salesforce the way you would look at any product that is being developed. Even ones that are being sort of packaged and sold to external customers, which is you want to have a multi-year product roadmap in place. It doesn't need to be incredibly well defined, especially when you get further out than, say, 12 months, but you ultimately want to know where Salesforce is heading. What are the features you are going to have to add? What are the other systems that you will likely need to move off of and migrate onto Salesforce or onto other platforms? You want to have those sort of earmarked on the roadmap so you know what you're building against, and that is really the North Star, so that you can meet and address the needs of the business getting out in front of them rather than, 1 or 2 quarters after the pain is already being felt. And so when you have a roadmap in place, what it means is that when new requests come in, you can sort of vet those against the roadmap, right? So is this something that we already have on the roadmap? And yeah, we can wait, 3 months to actually work on it and get it out in line with the schedule that we already have in place. But it also just lets you look at things from a more holistic perspective, because when you're reactive, you make decisions that in isolation make a lot of sense. You're, whatever it is that you're building, whether it's with code or with flows, it can make sense in isolation why you're building it, what you're building, and you could be building it the right way. But you stack 30 of those decisions on top of each other and you start to create a little bit of bloat and a ton of dependencies. And that's where you're then sort of on the slippery slope. So, you really just need to be able to look at all of the requests in the context of the broader roadmap and where the go-to-market systems infrastructure is already heading, and use that to sort of balance out what is needed and when it's needed to have a slightly more predictable, sort of cohesive roadmap and delivery timeline that you're building against.
I think it's, first of all, it's accurate, and we see it a lot. I think one of the features that we are proud of the most is our collaboration feature, the ability to bring people, even if it's from different teams, even if it's business users, into one canvas, a visual workspace that they can see their Salesforce process, they can engage, they can talk with each other, they're understanding what's actually built, and it's always in the context. And it's quite amazing that we see, salespeople, marketing people are interacting on Salesforce instances, discussing what automation should be here, what is the validation rule should be at that step. They have the wide context of the process and they can see it, and it actually brings a lot of efficiency to go-to-market teams. And we love seeing this. Obviously, we're very proud of it. There is another question here before our time runs out, which I actually like. The question is, what are the 2 skills you would say that the people getting started with Salesforce should have? Mallory, what do you think will be the skills for someone that is just starting to use Salesforce?
For someone getting started, I think one thing that really helped me was this database kind of thinking. And so I remember someone explaining this to me very, very early on, that, leads are a table, contacts are a table, opportunities are a table. And when you can kind of visualize it that way and then start to picture how you need those things to be connected to get your data to flow across the customer journey, it kind of opens your mind to understand a little bit better how the product works. And so I think just having that flexibility in systems thinking and trying to begin with the end in mind are really practical, things that can help you with any tool. A lot of people in the chat have also been talking about the resources available to learn Salesforce. And so I think just having that curiosity and a desire to keep on learning new stuff is really kind of inherent. I got to be a Salesforce admin prior to all of the Trailblazer stuff. And so I haven't been through each and every one of those courses like a lot of people have, but I've heard great things about the ability to learn just about anything. And so I think that is another really good sort of personality trait, people who are really curious and want to learn more.
Amazing. Thank you. Another question here from Seth. How should we roadmap a move from HubSpot to Salesforce? Who wants to take it, Max? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's dependent on the context a little bit, right? In terms of what's implemented, what's motivating the move, to Salesforce. A lot of sort of context of how that would look. I think it would certainly start with where are the areas that you feel like you have already outgrown HubSpot, right? So start with defining the objectives behind the move. make sure that they really are clear in terms of where you've hit the ceiling, what you're expecting to get out of Salesforce, and then just doing some light due diligence on on what that specific sort of roadmap would look like for designing, that additional functionality in Salesforce, whether you're going to do it natively or whether you're, expecting that, Salesforce is going to be the answer to the question or to the problem, but then you're actually going to, the real solution is going to be integrating one or two, third-party tools to play alongside Salesforce that, maybe would have sufficed within HubSpot. So I think it's a little bit hard to answer in terms of just a blanket HubSpot to Salesforce migration. I think there's like very tactical answers if you're just like a basic, Sales Cloud, as far as, auditing current, features and functionality to make sure that you have feature parity, doing, a lot of the data and integration mapping, and just understanding sort of how that's going to look in practical terms once you do make the move. It varies in the complexity of these as well, right? If you're a pretty straightforward, lightweight HubSpot, sales instance, and you're moving on to something similar in Sales Cloud, but you want a higher ceiling on how you can customize it and scale it at some point in the future, that there's going to be very little sort of involved in that in terms of complexity. And there's plenty of scenarios where that's not at all going to be the case. I think it just depends on what's motivating the move and what you're planning to then build against once you get to Salesforce, though. I know that's a little bit of a non-answer, but.
Yeah, but Seth that asked this answer, I see that he replied to that he loved this answer. So I guess we answered Seth, and I hope that we manage also to answer a lot of other questions here. We're about to run out of time. I do want to use the last few minutes for some what to consider questions. So ending notes, Mallory, if I was a RevOps calling you now as a friend or writing to you on LinkedIn, I'm thinking about this move. What should I consider?
Let's see here. So I'm going to assume for this question that we're in like the early stage, either early startup company stage or early stage of, just getting started with Salesforce. I'm going to base this on some mistakes that I have seen made. So I've been part of these mistakes in the past, but I was at a company once that didn't do a good job of keeping track of customer contracts. And specifically, we lost a lot of money on one customer relationship because we couldn't find the contract. We couldn't hold them to any kind of contract. And so the payments just didn't happen. And that was due to a lot of merger and acquisition stuff and like transitions. But the point here is save the attachments to the account. It's so simple. Just save the stuff in the system. The moniker is kind of like, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. You really kind of have to follow that if you want it to become a reliable source of truth. I always try to think about the people who are going to use my system like 5 years after me and put myself in their shoes and think about what they would want. I would start using products on the opportunity as soon as you can. That is going to show you what people actually bought. So many companies just type in a dollar amount and go about their day, and they don't think about when they're going to become a big company and they need to have permissions and feature gates, and they need to know what people have access to. So I would use the products pretty early. That will enable you to use a CPQ later. And most people don't need CPQ for quite a while, but when you do, you have to migrate all of your customers' product data into, the system that you're going to use. So that's an important one. I would document things that you don't think are going to change within the next quarter. So I wouldn't overdo the documentation with stuff that's going to change on a monthly basis. But if you think it's solid enough that it's going to be the same a quarter from now, go ahead and document that so your team has access to go look it up. And then plan ahead for the integrations. I think that's one of the most important things that Max also mentioned in a migration project is try to think, what is going to get integrated into this thing? How do I make sure everything plays nicely together? That can really influence your data model.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mallory. Max, your ending thoughts?
I think it comes down to just making sure you're level setting your expectations and approaching, this adoption in the right way. We've touched on a couple of these things, but I think certainly the biggest one that comes to mind is remembering that it is process before technology. So if you're expecting to move to Salesforce and have it fix foundational issues that exist, it's never going to happen, right? You need to focus on maturing and engineering or re-engineering whatever processes you have in place before migrating to Salesforce. And I actually think that these kinds of migrations are a really good forcing function for organizations to get serious about, process engineering. Things that very easily get sort of kicked down the road. There's 5 or 10 hours a week of manual work here and there, but it's not preventing us from doing anything. We'll get to it in the future. These kinds of projects are a really good opportunity for everyone to stop and think about the way that they actually operate day to day, week to week. Optimize on the process level first, and then once that is set, then wrap new technology around it. But you see it all the time with something like CPQ. You sort of expect that you see companies who expect to adopt CPQ and for it to be the solution to all of their problems. And a lot of these issues, then they move to CPQ and they've got the exact same headache. And then they say, Salesforce CPQ or whatever tool, it's a bad product, and this, that, and the other, when in reality, it's probably because your pricing was overly complex, or you have zero consistency in how, you're managing your upsell and renewal strategy. And so everything is just a discussion between sales reps and deal desk and finance. CPQ is not going to streamline that when the issues are much more on a foundational level. So I think use these kinds of projects as a real opportunity to kind of rethink how you do things and focus on the process first. And then I think another one that, both Mallory and I have sort of commented on is just to start small and then iterate, right? Don't fall into the temptation of now we've got Salesforce and it can do anything we want it to do, so we have to do it all. Really just start with, redesign the functionality that you have in your CRM and that works well for you. Design new features and functionality that you now can do in Salesforce that you were constrained by your current tool with. And then leave the rest for the next phase. Leave the rest for the iterative process that, Salesforce and go-to-market systems really needs to be, because priorities will change, processes will change, other tools you have in place will change. So the more you try and sort of jam into that phase one just to get as much ROI as you can from Salesforce, it ends up being a little bit of a thorn in your side. So just start lightweight, get the baseline of what you need, and then figure out how you want to invest in continuing to build it out on an ongoing basis.
Amazing. Thank you. So before ending it, I do want to, my 2 cents in this is that I think Salesforce is a cultural change in the company. And this is something that should be understood, that it's not just another tool for the salespeople to use, because very quickly you would find yourself, and I found myself as RevOps chasing after salespeople because we bought Salesforce, we invested in the process, and we didn't make sure that it was properly adopted. And eventually I was finding myself running after people, just trying to do my job, get the data on the system, and the company was not ready for this yet, or it wasn't communicated properly. So first of all, it's something that is cultural in the company. And the second thing, it's a team sport. So we discussed a little bit about, who should own it. It's the RevOps, it's the system. Do you have an admin? Do you have external admin? And having an external resource is probably the easiest part, right? Because you always have someone external to blame if things are not working. But eventually it requires understanding that it's a team sport. And this is the thing about go-to-market in general, or sales. It's not only the responsibility of the sales team, it's also the responsibility of the customer success team, and it's the responsibility of the marketing team. And when everyone is together on Salesforce and this thing is actually working, there is a good synergy within the go-to-market, then Salesforce will be very, very useful for everyone. So with that being said, I want to thank first of all, everyone that joined today, for the great questions, for the participation. I want to thank Rev Genius for hosting this event, and obviously for you guys, Mallory and Max. I guess everyone that wants to find us can find us on LinkedIn. I know we have our LinkedIn attached to this event. So feel free to reach us directly if you have any questions. We enjoyed it. Good luck with your Salesforce journey. And we wish you all the best. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.